Welcome to my Clarkson Memorial video. The Thomas Clarkson Memorial is situated very near to the town of Ware in Hertfordshire. You exit the A10 just north of Ware. You go past Hanbury Manor through the village of Thundridge. You go down the hill, and at the bottom of the hill is the charming little hamlet called Wade's Mill, and there is a lovely pub, restaurant, hotel called the Feathers Inn, which used to be an old coaching inn. And you carry on up the hill, and to your left is the memorial. Blink and you'd hardly notice it. Indeed, I dare say that many local people from Hertford and Ware don't even know of his existence or know anything about Thomas Clarkson. According to articles in the Telegraph, the Independent and the Guardian, Thomas Clarkson is an absolute unsung hero, one of the most underrated men in history, who should be afforded much more recognition, status and remembrance for his incredible achievements. And so, who was Thomas Clarkson? Well, Thomas Clarkson was born in Wisbech in Cambridgeshire in 1760. His dad was a local headmaster at a school who very sadly died when Thomas was only 6 years old. Thomas Clarkson worked really hard at school. In doing so, he won a place at Cambridge University. And in 1785, he entered an essay writing competition that would change his life completely. In those days at Cambridge, they used to have to write their essays in Latin, which was incredible, really. So Thomas carried out an awful lot of research for his essay, and as he did so, he became increasingly shocked and angry about what he was discovering. You see, at that time, not much was known about the slave trade. It was not really in the public domain or in the consciousness of the public. As he read all about it, he became increasingly shocked by the numbers of fatalities of the slaves. He was shocked by the sheer volume of the slave trade. In one particular case, a judge at court had ruled that the value of the captured slaves as being on the par with horses and as not being on a par with human beings really upset him, because he felt strongly that all humans were equal and should be treated equally. The whole mistreatment of the slaves upset him greatly, and so much so that he even had trouble sleeping at night. Well, Thomas Clarkson, through his sheer hard work and diligence, won this prestigious essay writing competition at Cambridge. And in doing so, he was invited back to Cambridge to do a public reading of his essay. This he did in June 1785, and we know from his memoirs that on his way back to London on horseback, he became increasingly upset about the slave trade. We know from his extracts, which you can see here, that he stopped when he came into the sight of Wade's Mill. On the hill just above Wade's Mill, he sat down on the turf and resolved that he must do something about the slave trade. The memorial marks the spot of the very place that Clarkson determined to fight the slave trade and dedicate his whole life to fighting slavery. This is how the memorial used to look, quite shabby and inconspicuous. But on the 200th anniversary of the abolishment of the slave trade in Britain, the county council built a new, refurbished and cleaned up the old memorial and did this. It looks so much better now. On the 200th anniversary of Britain abolishing the slave trade, Robert Nurden, in his article in The Independent, written in 2007, said this: "Blink and you'll miss it. The tiny obelisk on the road out of the Hertfordshire village of Wadesmill hardly presents itself to the world, yet it is one of the most important monuments in British history. It marks a spot where slavery abolitionist Thomas Clarkson had an epiphany. On that day in June 1785, on a journey from Cambridge to London, he committed his life to ending the transatlantic slave trade. That marker serves an appropriate symbol for the hidden history of the slave trade. Tom Bliss, in his letter to the Telegraph, written in 2006, describes how the work of Thomas Clarkson and Granville Sharp should not go unrecognised, as they formed the Society of the Abolition of the Slave Trade together in 1787, and both worked tirelessly to produce a mountain of evidence against the slave trade. Robert Nurden, in his article for The Independent, describes how Clarkson worked so hard and travelled over 35,000 miles on horseback, behaving like an investigative journalist to get his story. He interviewed over 20,000 sailors, gathering evidence, which he later presented to the MP Wilberforce. Isabel Wolfe, in her article of the 14th of September 1996 in the Daily Telegraph, describes how Clarkson's role in the abolition of the slave trade had been, sadly, very obscured, but that it was he, and not William Wilberforce, who had orchestrated the great anti-slavery movement. Indeed, she goes on to say that she sees Thomas Clarkson as being the father of all modern campaigning. Both John Ezard, in his article in The Guardian, written in August 1996, and in Isabel Wolfe's article, in her Telegraph article, both describe how Clarkson was the engine room of the anti-slavery campaign. It was he who gathered all the evidence. It was he who gave numerous talks around the country. He printed pamphlets. He translated his essay back into English and widely distributed it. He organised numerous petitions, which is a modern thing to do, and he was one of the first to organise so many petitions against slavery. Here are examples of his anti-slavery propaganda, which you can see, and he wrote a book against slavery, and here's the front cover of it. And most importantly, he briefed Wilberforce, the MP, who raised the bill against slavery, raised the bill for the abolition of slavery, and it was Thomas Clarkson who provided all the information for that bill. The work he did must not be forgotten, and that's why we have this wonderful memorial just north of Wadesmill. And finally, here is a poem that was written by William Wordsworth, our very famous poet, in Thomas Clarkson's honour. I do hope that you've enjoyed watching this video and that you've found it interesting. And do please subscribe to my videos. Very best wishes. Bye.